Chapter 1624. As expected, Lan Zhao's lips curled up and a mocking smile appeared on his beautiful face. If not, Lingxiao College wouldn't have caused such a huge commotion. When they found out that something had happened, they already had this guess. In the end, it was really, "You fought with him?" Diwu Zhangze asked anxiously. Dugumabao paused. "Not really. After the sky shuttle array was destroyed, you repaired it. After that, I came back immediately." This injury was left behind because he didn't defend himself against the counterattack of the other party's power. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening. Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were both shocked. "Sky shuttle array? You asked that girl to repair it?" As Lan Xiao spoke, he suddenly thought of something, and his eyes widened slightly. "This is the reason why you asked to memorize those Xian arrays day and night." Dugumabao glanced at him expressionlessly, his eyes saying, "You just found out." Lan Xiao was instantly dealt a huge blow. "How old was that girl back then, and you already thought of this?" "Dugumabao, you're already so old and you're still doing this. How much did you suffer to memorize those things back then? You're really shameless." Although she was very talented back then, her level wasn't high enough, and the Xian arrays Dugumabao showed her were mostly too profound. In order to memorize those Xian arrays, she put in a lot of effort back then. If not for that, she wouldn't have been able to deal with Lingxiao College's disaster. Dugumabao looked indifferent. The college will be hers sooner or later. Protecting Lingxiao is also her responsibility. Although it was still a little early, this matter had long been part of Dugumabao's plan. Looking at his self-righteous look, Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were speechless for a moment. After all, what he said wasn't without reason. Although the process was difficult, the original intention and result were good. From the looks of it, Dugumabao was not wrong. It could only be said that it was too strict. "Pervert. Only that girl can stand you." Lan Xiao pouted. However, after hearing Dugumabao's words, their worries were greatly alleviated. Only one of his hands is hidden under the mountain of myriad wines. It should still be some time before it fully awakens. Dugumabao pondered for a moment before looking at the two of them. "During this period of time, you two should reconstruct your god bodies as soon as possible." "Easy for you to say." Lan Xiao leaned lazily against the metal chain at the side and reached out his hand to lightly knock on the cold and heavy chain. "We've been here for so long, and you're the only one who's succeeded. Not only that, but they also paid a hefty price." Dugumabao's face darkened. Lan Xiao pretended not to see anything and shook his head lazily. "Didn't you see that I failed last time? It took me a long time to fix this face. I won't be able to do it again in the near future." As he spoke, he looked up and glanced at Diwu Zhangze with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Diwu, why don't you try?" Diwu Zhangze took half a step back in disdain. "Speak properly." Lan Xiao was really sick in the head. Give him some sunshine, and he would be brilliant. He had just confirmed that Dugumabao didn't expose his identity in the world of God, and now he was making waves again. Lan Xiao closed his eyes and waved his hand. "Anyway, you guys can do as you see fit." If he failed again, it didn't matter if he lost his life, but the key was that he might drag these two down with him. It wasn't worth it. Diwu Zhangze shook his head helplessly and looked at Dugumabao. "It's naturally great that you didn't expose your identity this time, but there's no such thing as an airtight wall in the world. There will still be clues left behind. You have to be careful when you go to the world of God next time." Dugumabao knitted his brows slightly and then nodded. They had endured in the Red Moon Desert for 10,000 years. If they failed at the last step, it would be a huge loss. The previous two times were special circumstances, especially with Lingxiao College, and he had no choice but to take action. This was also the reason why he came back immediately after the matter was over. "Alright, how's you now?" Diwu Zhangze actually wanted to ask just now. The level of the sky shuttle array was extremely high. Although she had Dugumabao's help, it was still a huge challenge for her. Dugumabao's expression softened. She summoned the divine realm and regained her memories. "What? Really?" Dugumabao's words immediately made Lan Xiao, who was originally planning to rest, energize again. Did you remember what happened before? Dugumabao's eyes flashed, and he nodded. Actually, he didn't expect that she would. It was a pity that after the matter was over, she directly fainted. And he had to rush back to the Red Moon Desert as soon as possible, so he didn't have time to say more. She's injured, but Nan Suhuai and Rong Xiu are here, so it shouldn't be a big problem. That's good, that's good. Diwu Zhangze was overjoyed, and Lan Zhao's eyebrows were tinged with a hint of a smile. So, she has broken through to the exalted god level again? Dugumaba nodded. This was also what he was happy about. Back then, that girl had spent a lot of effort to cross that threshold. Once she was reborn, the past was gone, and everything started from scratch. Not everyone had such courage and perseverance. Fortunately, she was finally standing in this position again. Dugumabao's lips moved and he said, but, back then, she took the initiative to leave the divine realm to Meng Xian to help her keep it. Losing her memories seems to have been planned by her beforehand. Diwu Zhangze and Lan Xiao were both stunned when they heard this. There was too much information in this sentence, so they couldn't react for a moment. You're saying that back then she did it on purpose? Diwu Zhangze asked dryly. Dugumabao narrowed his eyes. Basically, I'm sure. Rong Xiu should know about this too. So, when we asked him back then, he refused to say it directly. Dugumabao didn't say anything. Perhaps she was the only one who knew the real reason. Forget it, that girl has always had her own opinions. She must have her own reasons for doing this. Lan Xiao, on the other hand, was very open-minded. He smiled and raised his eyebrows. The next time we see her, we'll ask her personally. Won't everything be clear then? Diwu Zhangze suddenly frowned, and his expression became serious. His reaction immediately attracted the attention of the other two. What's wrong? Dugumabao asked. Diwu Zhangze rarely showed such an expression. Seriousness, suspicion, confusion, worry. Hu Zhangze raised his eyes, looked at the two, and said word by word, the people from Black Demon Cave seem to have entered the god-slaying tomb. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1625. What are they doing there? Lan Xiao frowned. Haven't they stopped for the past few years? Why are they causing trouble again? The god-slaying mound was a dangerous place. Most people wouldn't go there for no reason. Even those who wanted to train or hunt for treasures wouldn't choose the god-slaying mound. There was nothing there except for corpses that had been deposited for thousands of years. Besides, the god-slaying mound covered a vast area. Once one went in, it would be difficult to come out. Just how bored were the people of the Black Demon Cave to go there? Dugumabao's eyebrows twitched. Can you find out how many of them went? Diwu Zhangze closed his eyes. A strange totem was faintly discernible between his eyebrows. After a while, he opened his eyes and shook his head. This aura is concealed very well. I can only temporarily determine that the people of the Black Demon Cave have gone to the god-slaying mound, but I can't guess anything else. If I were in the Divine Ruins world, I might be able to see more clearly. Unfortunately, he had been trapped here for tens of thousands of years and couldn't reconstruct his divine body. Naturally, he couldn't go. Those people have never had good intentions. As Lan Xiao said that, he suddenly laughed. However, after so many years, you can still detect their aura immediately. That's not bad. Diwu Zhangze snorted. No matter what, they had to kneel and salute me when they saw me back then. Although I've already cut off contact with them, it's always better to know your enemy. Dugumabao pondered for a moment and said, this is strange. Let's not make any moves for now and see what they're planning to do. Diwu Zhangze nodded in agreement. You and Lan Xiao can recuperate during this time. Leave the rest to me for now. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chu Luiwei and the others were getting closer and closer to the god-slaying mound. In the evening, they arrived in front of a forest that stretched endlessly. The strange thing was that the trees in the forest were all black with red leaves that weren't dense. The leaf was about the size of a palm. It was extremely thin and had a serrated edge. At first glance, they looked like red flying daggers. Shangguan Jing looked ahead with a solemn gaze and said in a deep voice, This is the Scarlet Soul Forest. Once we pass through here, we will reach the God-slaying mound. Hearing his serious tone, Chu Luiyue felt a chill in his heart. This place should be dealt with carefully. She tilted her head and looked ahead. Under the gradually darkening sky, the trees in the Scarlet Soul Forest were like bony hands covered in blood, gently swaying in the wind. A faint smell of blood permeated the air. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but frown. It's poisonous. This Scarlet Soul Forest will emit poisonous gas from dusk to dawn. Therefore, the best time to travel was at noon. Let's find a place to rest first and move out tomorrow, Sheng Guanjing explained. Chu Luiyue nodded and looked at Rong Xiu. Then, they followed Sheng Guanjing and stepped back. Outside the Scarlet Soul Forest, rocks were piled up. They found a relatively flat place surrounded by a few huge rocks and sat down. After Chu Luiyue sat down cross-legged, she quickly closed her eyes and continued to cultivate. After a few days of training, she wouldn't be as tired as the first day after running for a day. Therefore, other than recovering her strength, she used most of her time and energy to study Xian formations and prescriptions. Needless to say, she had already tried to repair the Sky Shuttle Array with Debao's power. Now, she had basically mastered the Xian formations that she had learned from him. In the past, those Xian formations were quite difficult for her. Even if she memorized them, she might not understand them completely. If he wanted to use it, it would be even more difficult. But after going through the Sky Shuttle Array, it was much easier for her to look at them now. In addition, she was also reading and studying the doctor's book of medicine that Elder Wan Zheng had left for her. In addition to the prescriptions that she recalled, there were many things that she needed to understand. After Chu Luiyue was completely immersed in her cultivation, Rong Xiu took out a brand new ink gold spirit stone and started to polish it. In fact, this was already the 8th ink gold spirit stone that Rong Xiu had taken out. He polished one every day, starting at night and ending at dawn. He could always polish the ink gold spirit stone perfectly within this period of time. Sheng Guanjing was still secretly amazed at the beginning, but he gradually got used to it. In these few days he understood two things. Firstly, Rong Xiu's family background is really rich. Second, Rong Xiu's talent and ability in refining weapons was indeed far beyond his imagination. After struggling for a while, Sheng Guanjing also got over it. Indeed, only such a man was worthy of his yu. After looking for a while, Sheng Guanjing suddenly thought of something and asked, Rong Xiu, we are going to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest tomorrow. Is your armor too late? Rong Xiu stopped what he was doing and looked up. Sheng Guanjing hurriedly said, Don't get me wrong. I'm not rushing you. I know that your efficiency is already very high. It's just that these days, you haven't slept or rested. I'm worried that you've exhausted too much energy. The Scarlet Soul Forest and the God-slaying Tomb are both extremely dangerous places. You have to be 120% alert to deal with them. Why don't you take a rest today? He had been to this place before and knew how difficult it was to deal with. He was really worried that it would be more dangerous for Rong Xiu to go in his current state. Rong Xiu's lips curved up and he smiled. Thank you for your kindness, Senior Shangguan. Besides, this armor is about to be completed. I'd better finish it directly. It's about to be completed? Sheng Guanjing looked surprised. Rong Xiu nodded. When this piece is polished, it's basically completed. Sheng Guanjing was stunned for a while. Rong Xiu said before that he wanted to create an armor that was more powerful than the pure gold sacred armor. Then it had to be a king artifact, right? But why did Rong Xiu say it so easily? A little later, I may have to trouble you to help take care of you. Rong Xiu raised his chin. I'll go over there and finish the last part. Triggering Tianlei would definitely cause a big commotion. He didn't want to disturb her. Sheng Guanjing nodded hesitantly. Rong Xiu's expression was way too calm, so he couldn't even say anything that worried him. This man always seemed to be calm. No matter what kind of situation he faced, he could easily deal with it. After about 4 hours, the moon was in the middle of the sky. Rong Xiu picked up the polished black gold spirit stone in his hand and stood up. He was about to walk forward when a young woman's voice suddenly came from not far away. This is the Scarlet Soul Forest? It doesn't look very good. Digression. These few days, the update time has been more casual, so today's update will end here. I won't let everyone wait any longer. Tomorrow at 12:05 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1626. The woman's voice was very young, with an undisguised arrogance and coquettishness. It was as if she really did not put the Scarlet Soul Forest in her eyes. Rong Xiu's gaze turned, and he lightly glanced in the direction of the voice. About 100 feet away from them, a group of people seemed to have just arrived. The one who spoke was a woman in a light yellow dress. She looked to be in her early 20s and had a petite figure. Her long hair hung down to her calves and fluttered gently in the wind. She looked rather fairy-like. Of course, one had to ignore her voice and the look of disgust in her eyes as she looked at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Beside her stood a well-built man. He looked to be in his late 20s, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He was handsome. He was much taller than the woman. When the two of them stood together, the contrast was great. Behind them stood two old men. They were dressed in black and white robes. Their hair was white and they looked rather old. However, the aura on their bodies was obscure and powerful, making them not to be underestimated. There are so many places in the Divine Ruins world to train. Why did Father choose this place? This forest looks so disgusting. The woman stretched out her slender white hand and covered her mouth and nose. Her slender eyebrows were slightly knitted. In order to come to this damned place, they had spent a lot of effort. Originally, she did not have much hope, but when she arrived, she realized that it was even more annoying than she had imagined. The white-robed old man standing behind her smiled and said, "Second miss, we are a little late. This Scarlet Soul Forest is filled with poisonous gas. If you come here during the day, the scenery of this Scarlet Soul Forest is actually not bad. Moreover, the Patriarch asked you to come with good intentions, didn't he? But I don't want to come." The woman interrupted the white-robed old man's words and crossed her arms. "Isn't it because that thing is here? But it doesn't have to be me and Big Brother coming personally. There are so many people at home who are idle, can't they just send a few people?" Originally, her life at home was quite comfortable. Who knew that her father would suddenly send her here, not even giving her a chance to refute? The white-robed old man smiled embarrassedly. The black-robed old man's face was cold and solemn. Seeing this, he spoke, "Second miss, that thing is extremely important to you. The Patriarch said that he still hopes that you can find it and bring it back yourself. That way, you can also convince everyone." His tone was much harsher and colder than the white-robed old man from before. When the woman heard him speak, she unconsciously lowered her arm. However, she still felt uncomfortable in her heart, so she raised her voice slightly and said angrily, "I'm the second young miss of the family. Even if I don't come personally, who dares to do anything to me?" The black-robed old man frowned. At this moment, the tall young man finally spoke. "Don't spout such nonsense." His voice was exceptionally deep and resounding, sounding like the beating of a drum. The tone of his voice carried the majesty and dominance of someone who had been in a high position for a long time. The woman called finally restrained her temper and stomped her feet. Got it. She dared to throw a tantrum in front of everyone, but she was afraid of her elder brother. This was also the reason why his father had sent him along this time. With him around, she had no choice but to suppress her temper. The young man gently patted her head, a doting smile on his face. "Be obedient. If you perform well, I will reward you when we return." Before he could finish his sentence, his expression suddenly froze and his voice came to an abrupt halt. Seeing his strange reaction, the woman couldn't help but ask, "Elder brother, what's wrong?" As she asked, she followed her elder brother's gaze and looked back. She was immediately stunned by what she saw. Not far away, a man dressed in white stood with his hands behind his back. The moonlight was like water and seemed to be exceptionally gentle when it fell on his back. Even though it was already late at night and most of the surroundings were shrouded in black shadows, it was still difficult to conceal this man's peerless charm. In fact, There was no need to see the man's facial features clearly. Just by looking at his aura from afar, one could tell that he was already more magnificent than a million other people. Nan widened her eyes slightly. For a moment, she felt as if her heart had been struck hard by something. The man only glanced over indifferently, then retracted his gaze and turned to leave. Nan subconsciously opened her mouth, but she couldn't say anything for a moment. "Sir, please wait." She didn't move, but Nan Yuxing, who was standing by the side, had already spoken. Rong Xiu stopped and turned back to look at them. "What's the matter?" His voice was as cold as jade striking against each other, naturally carrying some coldness and indifference. Obviously, he wasn't interested in continuing the conversation with them and didn't want to have anything to do with them. Nan Yuxing slowly clenched his fists behind him. "May I know what you heard just now?" Rong Xiu's expression was even more indifferent. "I heard everything." The two of them weren't far from each other and he was powerful, so how could he not hear? Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. He didn't expect the other party's attitude to be so tough. But on second thought, everyone had some ability. It would be more appropriate for them to be frank with each other. He cupped his fists. "What my sister said just now was just a casual remark. Please, I'm not interested in knowing this." Rong Xiu didn't wait for him to finish and interrupted him indifferently. He wasn't interested in the background and identity of these people. As for what they were looking for in the god-slaying tomb, he didn't want to know at all. "I still have something to do. Goodbye." He still had to rush to refine the armor for you, and didn't want to waste a single second on irrelevant people. Nan Yuxing didn't expect the other party to not give him any face and felt very embarrassed. He was born noble and no one had ever given him such a face in front of him. "Ha, how arrogant." He sneered. "Eldest young master, do you want to?" the white-robed elder asked tentatively. Although they didn't say the most important thing just now, that man still heard a lot. It was strange that this person appeared outside the Red Soul Forest in the middle of the night. They should really ask properly. Nan reluctantly retracted her gaze when she couldn't see that figure anymore. She happened to hear the white-robed elder's words and her expression changed. "Elder Bai Tong, what do you mean by this?" "He was just passing by and I didn't say anything important just now. Why are you making a fuss over nothing?" Elder Bai Tong was stunned by the sudden reprimand. Why was Second Miss so angry all of a sudden? Of course it's because our mission is important and can't be easily known to outsiders. It's clearly because we didn't notice that someone was here. Why are you blaming others in the end? Nan Yi frowned. In short, we can't find trouble with them. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1627. Elder Bai Tong didn't know what to say, so he shut his mouth in embarrassment. Nan Yuxing frowned and looked at Nan Yi with a scrutinizing gaze. Why are you speaking up for that person? This sister of his had been pampered since she was young. Normally, even the people in the family who wanted to hear a good word from her might not have the qualifications to do so. And that young man was just a stranger. It was really inconceivable that she would say such words. Nan Yi's face heated up from his stare. She looked away and said guiltily, "I'm not speaking up for him. I'm not speaking up for him, I'm just telling the truth. Big brother, have you forgotten that before we left, Father repeatedly told us not to casually stir up trouble outside?" Nan Yuxing looked at her speechlessly. It was hard for her to remember this. Unfortunately, she seemed to have forgotten that Father had specially said these words to her. "He didn't provoke us first. Why do we have to find trouble with him?" Nan Yi pursed her lips. When that man looked over, his gaze was extremely indifferent and he didn't even look at her. "I'm tired. I want to rest." Nan Yuxing could only shake his head helplessly at Nan Yi's words. All right. Let's not pursue the matter, right? You're right. We're already in the Red Soul Forest and will be able to enter the god-slaying tomb tomorrow morning. It's indeed better to avoid trouble. He looked around and pointed at a certain spot. Let's go there and rest first. Then the few of them walked over. As they walked, Nan Yi looked back a few times. Unfortunately, The night was dark and she couldn't see that elegant figure dressed in white. She retracted her gaze in disappointment and sat down behind a large rock with Nan Yuxing. Nan Yuxing glanced at her from the corner of his eye and his eyes darkened. How could Nanny's thoughts escape his eyes? She wasn't being kind. It was most likely that she had taken a fancy to that man just now. Nan Yuxing frowned. Actually, Nan Yi was already of marriageable age, but she was very playful and didn't take a fancy to any of the men that her family wanted to introduce her to. There was once when her father wanted to arrange a marriage for her, but in the end, she still ruined it. Later on, her father simply let her go and stopped caring about these things. He was just waiting for her to settle down. She didn't expect that she would actually take a fancy to a man whose identity she didn't even know, outside the Scarlet Soul Forest? Of course not. Nan Yuxing sat cross-legged, tapping his fingers on his knees. If she was just a little bit moved, then so be it. If he really did something because of this, he would have to think about it again. Elders, did you see that person's strength just now? Nan Yuxing asked after pondering for a moment. The two elders looked at each other and shook their heads. His aura is hidden very deeply. He must have used some kind of divine artifact to conceal it. Nan Yuxing paused. The two elders' eyesight was extremely good. Even they could not see through it. This proved that the other party did have some skills. Besides, both parties were so close to each other just now, but they didn't even notice the existence of that man. If he hadn't happened to look up and see, in short, that man was not to be underestimated. You have to be careful when you're outside. Nan Yuxing said. Besides, we're going to enter the god-slaying tomb tomorrow. We can't make any mistakes. The two elders' expressions turned solemn. Yes. Besides, since he's here, it's very likely that he's here for the god-slaying tomb. Tomorrow we must act separately from him. Yes. Nan Yi pouted in dissatisfaction. Big brother, what? Nan Yuxing glanced at her. What do you think? We're not here to play. He should help her find that thing as soon as possible and go home. Nan Yi was instantly discouraged. No matter how arrogant, domineering, and presumptuous she was, she knew how important this matter was. She couldn't be careless. Every time her big brother spoke in such a tone, she knew that she couldn't continue to make trouble. Got it. She lowered her eyes and pursed her lips. It didn't matter if she didn't see him. Anyway, she had already remembered that person's appearance. Although she couldn't see his appearance clearly, such a prideful person must be very famous. As long as she asked around, she wouldn't have to worry about not knowing his identity. Thinking of this, she suppressed the restlessness in her heart. Seeing that she was finally willing to listen, Nan Yuxing nodded in satisfaction. All right, it's already very late today. Everyone hurry up and rest. Boom! A loud roar suddenly sounded in the sky. The few of them immediately raised their heads to look. Dark clouds quickly gathered in the night sky, and the bright moon was quickly covered up. Then, a bright, silver, snake-like Tianlei appeared behind the clouds. This instant of light was like a knife that ruthlessly tore through the dark night. Elder Bai Tong suddenly said, "That person seems to be preparing to refine an yuan item?" The few of them looked over, and only then did they see that the white-clothed man they had just met had actually walked to a relatively spacious and flat area in the distance and stood there. Above his head was the place where Tianlei had appeared. There were piles of rocks here, and the night was dark, so they didn't see him just now. Nan Yi was delighted at first, but then she looked at the elder in black and asked in confusion. Elder Wu Peng, is he really going to refine a weapon? Elder Wu Peng was a weapon refiner, so he naturally had more say in this. As expected, although Elder Wu Peng's expression was still cold, he still nodded. I didn't expect him to be a weapon refiner. Elder Wu Peng, can you tell what level he is? Nan Yi asked curiously. Elder Wu Peng looked up at the sky and pondered for a moment. I can't be completely sure yet. However, this person's speed of triggering Tianlei is extremely fast. I think he should be quite capable. Nan Yi's eyes lit up. Rumble. Soon, the heavenly lightning in the sky rapidly gathered. After a while, countless Tianlei appeared in the sky, almost forming a sea of lightning. This is at least a high-grade divine artifact, right? Nanyi asked curiously. Although she wasn't a weapon refiner, she had seen many weapon refinement scenes since she was young, so she was quite experienced. Elder Wu Ping nodded. It's just refining a high-grade divine artifact. What's there to see? Nan Yuxing was very unhappy to see Nanyi's reaction and immediately pulled a long face. Nanyi snorted. There's nothing much to see, but he's a weapon refiner after all. Just this point alone makes you much stronger than me. He didn't look old either. A high-level weapon refiner in his 20s was considered pretty good in their family. At this moment, Elder Wu Peng suddenly took a step forward with a bewildered expression. Nanyi asked curiously. Elder Wu Peng, what's wrong? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1628. As she looked, she turned back to look. She saw that the man in white had taken out a few stones that glowed with a faint golden light. Those stones were of the same size and shape, and they were arranged in a row. Upon closer inspection, she could even see that there seemed to be black veins inside. Nan Yuxing was also shocked when he saw it clearly. Ink gold spirit stones? Elder Wu Ping nodded. The rest of them looked at each other. This thing was extremely precious. How could this man take out so many of them at once? Moreover, they were used to refine weapons. So many ink gold spirit stones. What kind of divine weapon is he refining? Nan Yuxing frowned slightly. He had only been suspicious before, but now he was basically certain that this man's identity was extraordinary. Elder Wu Peng did not say anything. His eyes were fixed on that spot. Perhaps influenced by the atmosphere, the rest of them fell silent at the same time. After placing the 8 ink gold spirit stones, Rong Xiu looked up at the sky. Tianlei was gathering and swimming wildly. The next moment, he gently closed his eyes. There was a brief silence. Following that, countless bolts of lightning came crashing down from the sky. Boom boom boom. Tianlei came crashing down. They hit the ink gold spirit stones hard. Sparks flew everywhere. His figure was almost completely swallowed by the dazzling light. He's not refining a high-grade divine weapon. Seeing this, Elder Wu Peng finally spoke in a deep voice. His tone was firm. He's refining a king divine weapon. The rest of them did not say anything. Actually, even if he did not say anything, they could tell. How could refining a high-grade divine weapon cause such a commotion? It was rare for them to see such a young king divine weapon refiner. He's quite capable, Nan Yuxing narrowed his eyes. But why does he want to refine weapons here? Refining a king divine weapon required a lot of time and energy. Even a king divine weapon refiner could not guarantee that he would succeed every time. Under normal circumstances, they would choose a quiet and safe place in advance and find someone to stand guard for them to ensure that they would not be disturbed before they officially began refining. One had to know that once the refining process was disturbed by external factors, the failure of refining was a small matter. If it caused a backlash to the refiner, it would be terrifying. But this man actually directly refined weapons outside of the Scarlet Soul Forest just like that? Was it because he was too ambitious, or did he have full confidence in himself? Arrogance. Nan Yuxing made a judgment in his heart. He had lived for so many years, and with his special status, he had seen many proud people. Even he himself was one of them. But the man in front of him was still more frivolous and arrogant than most people he had met. Even if the other party didn't say much to them from beginning to end. But he could still feel the arrogance in the other party's bones. This made him very unhappy. A weapon refining king at this age should be quite famous in the Divine Ruins world. Why don't I have any impression of him? Nan Yuxing searched his mind for a while, but he still couldn't find the right person. Elder Wu Peng, can you guess this person's identity? Elder Wu Peng shook his head. Either the other party disguised his appearance, or he's a newly advanced weapon refining king. He paused for a moment and hesitated a little. Actually, in his opinion, both of these situations were unlikely. What kind of person could disguise himself as such a talented and magnificent person? If an ordinary person wanted to disguise themselves, they would basically go in the direction of keeping a low profile. Who would do the opposite? Anyone who saw this appearance would never forget it. Then what was he after? As for the second guess, to a certain extent, it was even more ridiculous. He was a weapon refiner himself, so he could naturally see the other party's proficiency and ease. This was definitely not the strength and state that a newly advanced weapon refining king should have. There's another possibility: he concealed his true strength in the past. Only in this way can we explain many things that don't make sense. That's why he deliberately refined weapons here? Nan-yi came to a realization. There's basically no one here, so he specially chose this place. It's just that he definitely didn't expect to meet us. This was really a coincidence. The Scarlet Soul Forest actually circled around the God-slaying mound, but they just had to meet in this place. If this wasn't a coincidence, then what was? Hearing this, Nan Yuxing was slightly relieved. It seemed like this white-clothed man had indeed come here to find a convenient place to refine weapons. He didn't want to expose his identity, and they didn't want to interact with him. This way, both sides would mind their own business, which was not a bad thing. More importantly, it usually took a very long time to refine a king artifact. The shortest was a month, and the longest was half a year. He had even heard of someone who spent a full 3 years just to refine a king divine weapon. This showed how troublesome this matter was. If this was the case, when they passed through the Scarlet Soul Forest and entered the God-slaying mound tomorrow, this man would probably still stay here. Then, they wouldn't have to bother to separate from him. At this moment, another loud noise came from the sky. Several Tianlei appeared one after another. Nan Yuxing's expression changed slightly. Wasn't this person a little too fast to trigger the Tianlei? Enveloped by the light, Rong Xiu's eyes were still closed, and his expression didn't change. He raised his arm slightly, and his slender and fair fingers clenched into the air. The 8 black gold spirit stones started to fuse rapidly under the bombardment of the Tianlei. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from the Love Network. Chapter 1629. The incomparably hard ink gold spirit stone seemed to have become exceptionally soft in his hands, allowing him to mold it into any shape he wanted. When these ink gold spirit stones fused with each other, the faintly discernible black patterns inside also began to gradually connect with each other. A majestic aura was faintly emitted. How is his refining speed so fast? Elder Baitong also realized that something was wrong and hurriedly looked at Elder Wu Peng. It wasn't that they hadn't seen the scene of refining a king divine weapon before, but the current situation was truly beyond their expectations. Elder Wu Peng's brows were also furrowed. In fact, he had already noticed the abnormality just now, but he wasn't too sure. After all, even if he came personally, he might not be so fast. But now that the truth was right in front of him, he had to believe it even if he didn't want to. After a long silence, he said in a deep voice, "Even if it's a blacksmith of the same level, there will be a difference in strength due to the difference in talent and experience. Perhaps he has already tried many times before, which is why he can do it so easily today." A trace of doubt appeared on Elder Baitong's face. This isn't possible, right? What kind of background does he have to be able to take out so many ink gold spirit stones to practice? One had to know that if the refining failed, those materials would become a pile of trash. Elder Wu Peng pursed his lips. Of course, he knew this too. But other than that, he really couldn't think of a better reason. He had seen many blacksmithing geniuses, but they definitely wouldn't be able to do this. This person is not simple. Nan Yuxing pondered for a long time and gave a vague answer. At first, he didn't take the other party seriously, but now that he looked at it again, he had to admit that this person was indeed capable. He just didn't know what this identity was. Nan-yi glanced at him and asked excitedly, "Big brother, why don't we ask him after he finishes refining? It's rare to see such a young blacksmith. If we can be on good terms with him, it'll be good for us too, right?" How could Nan Yuxing not know what she was thinking? He only glanced at her indifferently. "Don't worry about these things. The only thing you have to do now is to enter the god-slaying tomb and find that thing." Nan-yi pursed her lips. She had repeated this matter so many times that her ears were about to grow calluses. She snorted and looked in that direction again. Even though Zhang Xian didn't know the other party's identity, the fact that he was able to become a king of blacksmiths meant that the other party's clan couldn't be too weak. Moreover, he was such an outstanding person. As long as he inquired a little, he would definitely be able to obtain a lot of information. Father always said that she was too picky. But in this world, there was indeed such a perfect and flawless person. Nanny placed a hand on her chest and exhaled softly, trying to calm her emotions. However, his heart was beating uncontrollably, as if it would jump out at any moment. Time passed slowly. The commotion from Tianlei's landing gradually died down. The 8 inky gold spirit stones in front of Rong Xiu had completely fused, and he had forged a preliminary armor. Only the heart protection mirror in the middle was slightly sunken in. Rong Xiu opened his eyes and, with a thought, transformed his origin power into a sharp flying knife. He held the flying knife in his hand and gently sliced it across his palm. Dark red blood instantly gushed out and dripped onto the heart protection mirror. In a short while, the sunken position was filled with his blood. Rong Xiu put away the flying knife, and golden flames leaped in his palm. The remaining blood on his hand quickly dissipated, and even the wound quickly healed. In this short period of time, the blood that was contained in the heart protection mirror had gradually seeped into the entire armor. Traces of faint red color spread out in the golden armor, fusing with the black patterns and gradually covering them. From the outside, it looked like there were faint traces of blood in the sparkling and translucent golden jade. It exuded an indescribable nobility. When the last drop of blood spread out, the smell of blood completely dissipated. The crimson lines became the strange patterns that were engraved on the inside of the armor. Rong Xiu's lips were slightly pale. However, his deep phoenix eyes became more and more focused. The light flickered and reflected in his eyes, dazzling. "Is it going to end?" Elder Bai Tong asked curiously as he raised his head to take a look. Tianlei didn't appear in the sky again. "How long has it been? It shouldn't be, right?" "Maybe it failed," Nan Yuxing said. It wasn't as if such a situation had never happened before. He was already used to it. He was so eager to trigger Tianlei just now, so now it should be kaboom. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard another loud bang coming from the sky. This sound was even louder than before. Then, behind the thick clouds, several more Tianlei appeared one after another. Nan Yuxing's face was a little ugly. In the next moment, those Tianlei fell again. Sparks flew everywhere. They could barely see the silhouette of the figure. Elder Wu Peng's eyes darkened. He might be able to succeed before dawn. The remaining 3 people were shocked when they heard this. But even Elder Wu Peng said so. Then Nan Yuxing slowly clenched his fists. The other party was in such a hurry. Could it be that he also planned to enter the god-slaying mound tomorrow? Rong Xiu began to forge and carve more carefully on the armor. He spent 120% of his energy on every inch and every part to make it perfect. The night gradually faded away. When the sky started to brighten, he finally stopped what he was doing. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1630. Tianlei had completely fallen, and the dark clouds had dispersed. The flames around him also dissipated bit by bit. Only the armor in front of him was left shining brightly. Although the armor was enveloped by a ball of light, outsiders couldn't see it clearly. However, that vast and powerful aura was impossible to ignore. Elder Wu Peng and the others fell into a dead silence. They all knew very well that it was indeed a King Divine weapon. This man actually really only used one day. In just one night, he had crafted an Emperor artifact. Although they were already mentally prepared, when they really witnessed everything with their own eyes, the shock in their hearts was still indescribable. Rong Xiu waved his wrist lightly, and that ball of light fell into his hand and disappeared. At this moment, the sky was about to brighten, and the surroundings were shrouded in a faint layer of fog, making it hazy. Dressed in white, He stood in the misty fog, looking even more like an immortal, elegant, and outstanding. Nan Yi was a little stunned. At this moment he suddenly turned around and walked over. His footsteps were light and calm, but every step seemed to be stepping on Nan Yi's heart. Nan Yi subconsciously held her breath, and her entire body tensed up. His heart thumped wildly, and his face seemed to be on fire. She had never thought that a man who she couldn't even see clearly could control her emotions so easily. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Nan Yuxing looked at Nan Yi and saw her staring blankly ahead. He wanted to speak. However, when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly couldn't say it. He had never seen his sister reveal such an expression for anyone before. Although he was usually a little strict with her, he still doted on her in his heart. If she really liked him, as long as the other party had a decent background, such good looks, and talent as a weapon refiner, she might consider him. At the thought of this, he took a step forward and cupped his hands politely. "Sir, please wait." Rong Xiu didn't stop, as if he didn't hear him at all. Nan Yuxing frowned. This man did have the right to be arrogant, but it wouldn't be good if he went overboard. He took a few steps forward and blocked Rong Xiu's path. Rong Xiu then stopped, looked up, and glanced at the other man. Nan Yuxing's heart skipped a beat. This man's eyes were deep and serene, like a bottomless cold lake. And this gaze was extremely cold and indifferent. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not a living person, but an insignificant object. This gaze made Nan Yuxing very uncomfortable. However, he was no longer a greenhorn, so he could still control his emotions. The smile on his face did not change. "Your Excellency, please don't misunderstand. We have no ill intentions. I am Nan Yuxing. Seeing that you are already a king of blacksmiths at such a young age, I am very impressed. I wonder if we can be friends? In the future?" "No need." Before he could finish, Rong Xiu had already given him a straightforward answer. After saying that, Rong Xiu took a step, bypassed him, and continued to move forward. Nan Yuxing was still in a daze. It was rare for him to take the initiative to build a relationship with someone, but he was rejected? Usually, countless people wanted to talk to him and make friends with him, but they might not have the chance. This man he was so angry that he laughed and turned around. "You are so arrogant." Although he was laughing, the sarcasm in his words couldn't be clearer. Rong Xiu didn't even stop in his tracks. Nan Yuxing finally couldn't maintain his expression. Before he could flare up, Nan Yi had already rushed forward. Wait. She jogged over and quickly rushed in front of Rong Xiu. A change finally appeared in Rong Xiu's indifferent expression. His brows furrowed slightly, and a hint of impatience appeared between his brows. Nan Yi looked up and saw his face. For a moment, her mind was almost blank. Previously, she hadn't been able to see his face clearly, but now that they were only a few steps apart, she could see him clearly. His sharp eyebrows reached his temples, his phoenix-like eyes were as deep as the sea, his nose bridge was high, and his crimson lips were like the first color of spring. It was clearly an extremely cold and distant face, but there was a hint of spring in it. For a moment, he was as cold as a fairy, but in the blink of an eye, he was as charming as a demon. He could really be called a peerless beauty in the world. Suddenly, the words that Nan Yi had prepared were stuck in her throat, and she couldn't say them. This face had such a huge impact on her that she didn't notice the impatience in Rong Xiu's eyes. "Move aside." Rong Xiu spoke. His voice was as cold as ice, but it also had a noble aura that couldn't be disobeyed. Almost instinctively, Nan Yi took a step to the side. Seeing this scene, Nan Yuxing was furious. His sister had always been fearless. Their entire family treated her like the apple of their eye, afraid that she would be aggrieved if they bumped into her. In the end, not only did this man not give her any face, he even directly ordered her to move aside. Nan Yuxing's figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside Nan Yi. He pulled Nan Yi behind him and took a step forward with a sneer. "Is the king of weapon refinement really so amazing? We are kind enough to befriend you. Why do you have to be so high and mighty?" He had only given Yi some face because she liked him. Unfortunately, the other party didn't seem to appreciate it. refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Rong Xiu didn't have any patience for outsiders, let alone these people who had once wanted to find trouble with him. He finally looked straight at Nan Yuxing. At this moment, Nan Yuxing suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Rong Xiu's expression was languid, and his voice was extremely indifferent. "You've delayed my visit to my wife." Every word and sentence was filled with chilling intent. Digression. Has everyone seen the news of the change in monthly votes? To put it simply, you will have to spend more Xiaoxiang dollars to get a monthly vote in the future. Moreover, each person can only give a maximum of 5 monthly votes to a book every month. There is also a limit to the number of votes per day. Non-top scorers are allowed 2 votes per day, and top scorers are allowed 5 votes per day. But the limit is 5 votes per month. If you have monthly votes, please vote as soon as possible. The change will be official in 3 days. You won't be able to bury February with a handful of monthly votes anymore. The star of monthly votes will also be changed to the star of reviews. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1631. A coldness surged from the bottom of his heart, causing Nan Yuxing to feel cold all over. However, Nan Yi's attention was on a certain word. "Madam? He was already married?" Nan Yi's heart instantly turned cold, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her head. "Rong Xiu." At this moment, a clear female voice sounded from behind. Nan Yuxing and Nanny saw the man who had spoken coldly and mercilessly to them just a moment ago, looking straight ahead. In an instant, the frost in his eyes melted rapidly. What replaced it was an unconcealable gentleness and gentleness. His scarlet lips curved slightly, and there seemed to be a stream of light flickering in his deep phoenix eyes. The aura around him also became completely different. You're awake?" As he spoke, he directly walked past the brother and sister and walked over. A faint cold fragrance swept past her nose. Nanny turned around in a daze and looked in the direction he had gone. Not far away, behind a few stones, stood a woman. That woman was dressed in a red dress and looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. Her skin was as fair as snow. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. She was only dressed in a simple red dress, and her black hair was simply tied up. There were no extra accessories on her body, and as she stood there, she seemed to be more beautiful than a myriad of magnificent scenes. There was a smile on her lips, but her entire body was enveloped in an incomparably noble aura, revealing a noble aura from her bones. In this misty white fog, she appeared especially beautiful and devastatingly beautiful. The moment she saw the other party's face clearly, Nan Yi was stunned at first, then she couldn't help but feel sour and jealous in her heart. She had always flaunted her beauty, but in front of this woman, it was the first time she felt ashamed of her inferiority. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she knew very well that the other party's beauty was indeed much better than hers. Nan Yi couldn't help but look down at herself. Her clothes were luxurious and she was particular about everything. But at this moment, in contrast to the other party, she started to feel that her outfit was very cumbersome. Even when she lowered her head, the jingling, dangling hair ornament on her head made her feel vexed. She was dressed up so exquisitely, but it was not as moving as the other party's bare face. Any woman would feel uncomfortable. Rong Xiu had already walked over and tucked the strands of hair by her cheek behind her ear. His movements were skillful and natural. He looked at the person in front of him, his voice low and pleasant. "Did you rest well? Did I disturb you?" Chu Liwei shook his head and smiled. Actually, I woke up when you were refining just now." Rong Xiu frowned slightly and glanced at Sheng Guanjing behind him. Sheng Guanjing shrugged helplessly. With such a huge commotion, even a barrier wouldn't be able to stop it. Originally, before Rong Xiu prepared to refine, he was worried that he would disturb her rest, so he specially set up a layer of enchantment. But from the looks of it now, it should be useless. She had always been sensitive to these things, so it was impossible for her not to have noticed it. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He took out a ball of light and handed it over. "Take a look." Chu Luiyue took the item, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. She knew that Rong Xiu was extremely talented in refining weapons. It wasn't that the two of them had never competed in this aspect before. But she basically lost. Moreover, she had never tested Rong Xiu's true strength. This was the first time she had seen Rong Xiu refine an Emperor Divine weapon with her own eyes. Others might not be able to see it clearly, but this thing was in her hands now, so she could see it clearly. It was a suit of armor. The entire body was a faint golden color, but the texture looked more like jade, but it was extremely light in the hand. You can drip blood directly to recognize it as your master. Rong Xiu said. Chu Luiyue nodded slightly, took out a dagger, and cut her palm. Dark red blood immediately gushed out. It dripped on the armor. The armor flickered with light, and the blood was quickly swallowed and absorbed, disappearing on the surface of the armor. Extremely thin blood-colored patterns appeared inside. In an instant, Chu Luiyue sensed that there seemed to be some kind of connection between her and the armor. After that, with a flash of light, the armor quickly disappeared. Chu Luiyue blinked. The wound on her hand quickly healed, leaving only a faint pink scar. A faint layer of golden light enveloped Chu Luiyue's body, but it quickly disappeared. But she knew very well that the armor had already recognized her as its master. Then, she seemed to have sensed something, and her eyes widened slightly as she looked at Rong Xiu. "This? Do you like it?" Rong Xiu asked with a smile. Chu Luiyue's words were suddenly stuck in her throat. After a moment, she nodded seriously. "I like everything you give me." The scene of the two talking and laughing as if there was no one else around deeply provoked Nanti. She couldn't help but take a step forward. "You gave her the King Divine weapon that you worked so hard to refine so easily?" A cold glint flashed across Rong Xiu's eyes. Chu Luiyue blinked and looked at the other party for the first time. In fact, she had seen and heard the scene of the siblings blocking Rong Xiu just now. It was obvious that this woman had taken a fancy to Rong Xiu. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so unforgiving. Do you know how much effort he put in to refine this? You actually accepted it with a clear conscience? As if sensing Chu Luiyue's gaze, Nandi directly aimed the cannon at Chu Luiyue. No matter what, that was a King Divine weapon. She gave it away so easily. Looking at Nanyi's agitated and resentful appearance, Chu Luiyue was a little amused. She raised her brows and was about to speak, but Rong Xiu had already turned around. "Firstly, this is a divine weapon that I refined. It's my business how I want to deal with it. Since when is it your turn to interfere?" Nanyi shuddered from his cold gaze and her rebuttal became softer. "But, secondly, this is a gift that I specially prepared for Madam. If I don't give it to her, do I have to give it to you?" Rong Xiu enunciated every word, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Being stared at by his intimidating gaze, Nanyi finally sensed a trace of danger. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. Nan Yuxing was angry and heartbroken. He immediately stepped forward and stared at her warningly before pulling her behind him. His sister was used to being arrogant and spoke as she pleased. Even he felt embarrassed when he heard what she said just now. But this was his sister after all. How could he let her be bullied when she was outside? Nan Yuxing took a deep breath. "My sister didn't mean that." Rong Xiu didn't have any patience with the siblings and directly interrupted him. He stared coldly at Nanny. "Thirdly, who do you think you are? How dare you criticize my wife?" Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1632. The last sentence successfully caused the expressions of the siblings to change. Nan Yuxing was both shocked and furious. He was shocked because he didn't expect the other party to be so impudent. He was angry because that man had actually said such humiliating and contemptuous words to his sister. Nanyi's eyes widened in disbelief. She had been pampered and spoiled since she was young. Not to mention insults, she had never even heard a harsh word from anyone. Now that she was suddenly pointed at and scolded, She naturally took a long time to regain her senses. After she regained her senses, her face quickly flushed red. Something seemed to be surging crazily in her chest and was about to burst out from her chest. You? She wanted to refute, but even her voice was trembling. Because her emotions were very complicated at this moment. It was the first time she liked someone, but she didn't expect the other party to say such words before she could express her feelings. The impact was so great that she didn't even have time to be angry. She was completely stunned. Nanyu Xing hurriedly turned around to look at her. When he saw her expression, his heart ached. When had his precious sister ever suffered such grievances? Sir, aren't you going overboard with your words? Nanyu Xing raised his voice, and the aura around him began to surge. He only said a few words casually, but you're so rude. Is bullying a woman like this something a man should do? Rong Xiu's brows moved slightly. She said all those things and she deserves it. Instead of criticizing others here, why don't you go back and think about how to change your precious sister's bad habit of speaking without thinking? The other party had offended him time and time again, and he was already impatient with them. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to refine this armor, he would have already been rude to them yesterday. Nanyu Xing was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. It had been a long time since he met such an arrogant and impudent person. Such a young king of weapon refinement was indeed outstanding. But this didn't mean that they were afraid of him. Looks like you don't intend to apologize? He asked gloomily. In his words, there was already an unconcealable murderous intent surging. When Nanyi saw this, she hurriedly went forward and grabbed his arm. Brother, what are you doing? Nanyu Xing frowned. He humiliated you, so I naturally planned to teach him a lesson and help you vent your anger. Of course, Nanyi knew what he meant. In the past, she had often asked Big Brother for help. But it was different this time. If Big Brother beat him up, then wouldn't the other party really see her as an enemy? She was angry, aggrieved, and furious. However, he didn't want to completely fall out with the other party because of this. Big Brother had always been ruthless. If he killed or crippled someone, it's not his fault. Why did you hit him? Nanyi bit her lip and looked at Chu Luiyue with resentment. The look in his eyes was very clear. If there was someone to blame, it should be her. If it wasn't for protecting her, he definitely wouldn't have done this. Chu Luiyue? She hadn't even said a single word from the start to the end, and this hat was actually placed on her head? How could Nanyu Xing not know what his sister was thinking? It was nothing more than reluctance. Nanyu Xing really expected better from her. His words were already so harsh and his attitude was so clear, but she still refused to come to her senses. At this time, she was still speaking up for him? What the hell? He originally wanted Nanyi to step back and make a move himself. However, Nanyi hugged his arm tightly and refused to let go. Nanyu Xing was angry and frustrated. In the end, he could only grit his teeth and hit Nanyi's head hard. In the past, he only thought that she was a little delicate and willful, but he didn't know that she could go to such an extent for a man. He was really disappointed. The atmosphere between the siblings fell into a stalemate. Eldest young master, 2nd Mississippi. It's daybreak and the poisonous gas in the Scarlet Soul Forest has dissipated. It's time to go in. Elder Wu Peng spoke at the right time to break the stalemate. Elder Bai Tong also hurriedly acted as a peacemaker. The time it takes to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest is very short. Young master, miss, we have to hurry. The two of them said this to give them a way out. Nanyu Xing grabbed Nanyi's wrist and headed in the direction of the Scarlet Soul Forest. Let's go. They were here because they had something important to do. As for that man who didn't know what was good for him, when everything was over, they would think of a way to deal with him. Nanyi's wrist hurt from being grabbed and she frowned. However, she knew that her elder brother was angry at this moment and didn't dare to say anything. She could only follow them. The two elders also followed one after the other. When the two sides brushed past each other, Elder Wu Peng gave Rong Xiu a meaningful look. Rong Xiu's expression was indifferent and calm, as if he didn't take them seriously at all. Chu Luiwei blinked and looked at the few people's back view. Rong Xiu was considered famous in the Divine Ruins world and many big shots had seen him before. These two people seemed to be of high status, but they didn't seem to know Rong Xiu. What are you thinking about? Rong Xiu's voice sounded. Chu Luiwei looked back thoughtfully. Nothing, I just feel that their background doesn't seem simple. The four of them concealed their auras very well, but her intuition told her that they shouldn't be weak. More importantly, they had witnessed Rong Xiu refining a king divine weapon with their own eyes, but they didn't seem to be very shocked. One had to know that the people from the major sects and families had directly fallen out with Lingxiao College in order to fight for the Scarlet Heaven Sword in Blue Feather's Abyss. At that time, they had thought that the Scarlet Heaven Sword was a king divine weapon. It could be seen how important and noble a king divine weapon was to these people, so much so that they would pay a huge price to fight for it. But these people, from the beginning to the end, they didn't seem to covet the king divine weapon at all. In this situation, they either knew that they couldn't win, so they didn't even have any thoughts about it, or this thing wasn't that precious to them. Judging from their arrogant attitude, it shouldn't be the first case. But if it was the second case, then it would be interesting. Chu Luiwei had been in the Divine Ruins world for a long time and knew that king divine weapons were extremely precious to many families, even first-rate families. What kind of background did these people have? They were actually like this. That black-clothed old man should be a weapon refining supremacy. Sheng Guanjing retracted his gaze and muttered. Just now, he had been staying behind a few stones, and the conflict had been between Rong Xiu and Chu Luiwei, so those people didn't pay much attention to him. A weapon refining supremacy is the follower of those two? Chu Luiwei raised her eyebrows slightly. Interesting. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1633. She stretched out her finger and gently tapped Rong Xiu's chest. She smiled mischievously. Rong Xiu, maybe she really is a young lady from a certain family and has an extraordinary background. Even a girl like her fell in love with you at first sight. It's clear that you're still as powerful as before. Back then, Rong Xiu was still a young man. He was still a bit immature, but he was already the dream boy of countless girls. On the first day he entered Lingxiao College, he attracted the attention of almost half of the girls in the college. Now that a few years had passed, he had grown from a young man to a man. His appearance was enchanting, and his temperament was noble. Even Chu Luiwei couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This man's every movement was even more magnificent than before. Rong Xiu glanced at her indifferently, grabbed her hand, and suddenly moved closer. The two breathed together, and they could almost feel each other's hot breath. A cold fragrance lingered around them, adding to the charm and gentleness. The two clearly didn't move closer. Being stared at by Rong Xiu's bottomless eyes and enveloped by his aura, Chu Luiwei inexplicably felt her face heat up. His movements were very restrained and polite. Only she knew how unbridled and aggressive his gaze was at this moment. Chu Luiwei's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His gaze was so intense that it almost forced her to subconsciously turn her face away. "Do you smell something?" Rong Xiu suddenly asked. His voice had always been deep and pleasant. At this moment, the two of them were very close. He deliberately lowered his voice, so it was more like he was whispering into her ear. Chu Luiwei felt as if she was even hotter. "What's that smell?" Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. "It's so sour." Chu Luiwei suddenly came back to her senses. She glared at him angrily, then pushed him away. She snorted and turned to leave. A certain someone was really getting more and more arrogant. Rong Xiu was pushed away, but he was not angry. He only laughed. Chu Luiwei instantly quickened his pace. Only then did Rong Xiu lift his feet and follow him unhurriedly. Do you really not smell it?" Chu Luiwei pretended not to hear anything. Sheng Guanjing looked at the sky speechlessly. He smelled the sour stench of love. Soon, Nan Yuxing and the others arrived at the Scarlet Soul Forest. Just as he was about to enter, he heard footsteps behind him. Nan Yuxing turned around and frowned. "Why are they here?" He felt even more disgusted and couldn't help but sneer. You were so arrogant just now, why are you chasing after me now? I'm telling you in advance that we won't pursue the matter from before for the sake of my little sister. But if you continue to pester us, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Luiyue looked at him strangely. Young master, are you misunderstanding something? We're just going to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb. We're not in the mood to continue arguing with you. Nan Yuxing's face turned ugly. That man's words were extremely unpleasant, but he didn't expect this woman to be the same. She had a sharp tongue and didn't know what was good for her. He clenched his fists and his voice was even colder. You're going in too? The God-slaying tomb is extremely dangerous. Why are you going there for no reason? He had thought that they had specially come to this deserted place to refine Emperor Divine weapons, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. Chu Luiyue almost laughed out loud. Are the Red Soul Forest and the God-slaying tomb your territory? Only you can enter and others can't? Isn't this too unreasonable? Nan Yuxing was speechless. He was indeed in no position to stop the fun here. But Nan Yi suddenly crossed her arms and sneered. Of course it's because there's something wrong with you. We were about to pass through the Red Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb, but you followed us. The God-slaying tomb is vast and there are countless places to enter. Why did we meet you here? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? As long as she wasn't fighting with Rong Xiu, her combat strength wasn't weak. Moreover, she had already regarded Chu Luiyue as her enemy in her heart. When they spoke, it was naturally tit for tat. Oh, so that's how it is. It does sound reasonable. Chu Luiyue nodded as if she agreed with him and changed the topic. But it seems that we were here first. If there's a problem, it should be you, right? Nan Yi was stunned. You, she wanted to say something, but suddenly remembered that the other party seemed to have been here before they came. It didn't feel good to be in the wrong when they were in the right. Nan Yuxing also frowned. So, it was really just a coincidence? Even so, we have to go in from here now. Go somewhere else and don't go with us. His tone was very hard, as if he was ordering someone. Chu Luiyue felt that it was even more interesting. These two siblings seemed to have a screw loose in their heads. She didn't know if it was because they had been in a superior position for a long time and were used to ordering people around, but every word they said could successfully disgust her. Do you usually control the world like this? Chu Luiyue couldn't suppress the curiosity in her heart and asked sincerely. Nan Yuxing and the others were embarrassed. So, you don't want to do as I say? Nan Yuxing's voice seemed to carry a hint of threat. Chu Luiyue smiled and her eyes curved. She stretched out her hand and pointed at Nan Yi, saying very sincerely, Speaking of pestering, isn't it your precious sister who has been pestering my husband? I think the ones who should take the initiative to leave are you, right? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1634. Tuanzi buried its head in her shoulder and rubbed against her. Then it reluctantly let go of her hand. Then you will miss me every day. Chu Luiyue kissed her face. Dumpling jumped down from her arms, snorted at Yu Qian, and turned to leave. Yu Qian looked at Ruan Jianfeng. Go and arrange her residence. In fact, this matter should have been handled by Jin Yunlai. But because of Mu Yafeng's matter, almost all of his authority had been taken away. Even such a matter was handed over to the fifth divine emissary. Chu Luiyue watched Dumpling leave. Yu Qian was obviously worried about her. He had been following behind her, as if he wanted to personally send her back to Feng Ming Mountain. Chu Luiyue raised her eyes slightly. The light barrier between the illusory God Palace and Feng Ming Mountain fell from the sky, flickering with a faint glow. She had always thought that this barrier couldn't be passed, but now it seemed that it didn't cause any obstruction to Dumpling. This was much more convenient. Shengguan Yu, come with me. She put away her thoughts and smiled at Ruan Jianfeng. Sorry to trouble you, fifth divine emissary. Ruan Jianfeng didn't say anything and walked in a certain direction. Chu Luiyue immediately followed. When he passed by Jin Yunlai, he suddenly said, Wait. Chu Luiyue stopped in her tracks and turned to look at him. Seventh Divine Emissary? I have a question for you. Jin Yunlai said, staring at her eyes as if trying to see something from them. The last Xian formation wasn't included in the mythical flame diagram. How did you crack it? This last Xian formation was undoubtedly the most difficult one on the entire star path. Even he had spent a lot of time and energy to barely crack it back then. Even after that, he had spent several years and tried countless times before he finally managed to successfully unleash it. But what about Chu Luiyue? She had only been in the illusory god palace for a few months. From the heaven gate to the illusory god palace, she had deciphered the countless profound formations on this star road one by one. Even though she had seen some of them before, such efficiency was simply too shocking. Or even illusory. Jin Yunlai asked himself. Even now, he might not be able to cast the last Xian formation as quickly and smoothly as her. Chu Luiyue looked at him with clear eyes and a sincere expression. Is that very difficult? Jin Yunlai choked. For a moment, he felt that Chu Luiyue was mocking him. But in the next moment, Chu Luiyue laughed. That profound formation indeed did not appear on the mythical flame diagram because there was no need for it to be included. That Xian formation looked complicated, but in fact, it was just a collection of the Xian formations from before on the star road. Since the previous ones could be broken, how difficult would the last one be? Jin Yunlai's heart skipped a beat, and his entire body froze on the spot. Chu Luiyue's lips curved slightly. Without another word, she turned and followed Ruan Jianfeng. Patriarch Nan, let's meet another day. The flesh on Nan Jinshu's face trembled violently. At this moment, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt someone's gaze on her. She paused in her steps and looked up. In the distance, in front of the main hall of the illusory god palace, a person was standing with his hands behind his back, looking at her from afar. Jun Jiuqing. When did he come? Most importantly, he seemed to have come from the main hall. However, Jun Jiuqing's expression was different from before. In the past, he always had a smile on his lips, but now his face was calm and expressionless. He seemed to be looking at her, but his eyes seemed to be unfocused. In short, it felt a little strange. Su Li followed her line of sight and explained softly, Jun Jiuqing entered the main hall of the illusory god palace some time ago, but no one knows what he went there for. They didn't even know why Jun Jiuqing was qualified to enter the main hall. Chu Luiyue nodded and retracted her gaze. It seemed that although Jun Jiuqing and Nan Jinshu both had special privileges, Jun Jiuqing was still better. She just didn't know where did their special privileges come from. In the dark and cramped cell, Duge Mabao slowly opened his eyes. In the end, this day had still come. Although that person unilaterally tore the contract and caused the time to be brought forward, she didn't disappoint him. Everything that happened before wasn't wasted. In another cell, Lan Xiao was sitting on the ground with one leg bent and leaning against the wall. The air was filled with the faint smell of blood. He lowered his head to take a look. The wound on his arm was already gradually healing. After all, it was a divine body tempered by the golden Tianlei, so it naturally wouldn't be damaged so easily. His recovery ability after injury was also quite good. Looks like it's really soon. He touched his chin and chuckled softly. This chuckle affected the wound at the corner of his mouth, causing him to hiss in pain. He licked his lips and leaned his head slightly against the wall. Although it was dark all around and almost nothing could be seen, there was still a faint glow in his eyes. Chu Luiyue and Su Li followed Ruan Jianfeng all the way. Along the way, Su Li would explain to her in a low voice from time to time. She had been here for quite some time and was quite familiar with it. Chu Luiyue listened as she walked. Suddenly, she stopped and looked in a certain direction. Where is that? Su Li followed her line of sight. That's the residence of the seventh oracle. Chu Luiyue shook her head. No, I'm talking about the courtyard at the back. Su Li was stunned. Ruan Jianfeng suddenly turned around and looked at her. How do you know there's another courtyard there? Chapter 1635. She had too many advantages, like a dazzling pearl. He only wanted to hold her in his hands and monopolize her. Of course, he knew that this was just wishful thinking, because she deserved a wider world and a more prosperous scenery. Then he could only choose one and say it more obviously. As long as she stood here, she had already won. Why should he waste any more effort? Chu Liuyue's eyes flickered when she heard that. She had to admit that when this man said such words, it was always easier to move her heart. Cough. Shengguan Jing, who had been ignored and never paid attention to, coughed hard. He began to feel that it was a mistake for him to follow them. It was clear that the two of them didn't do anything. They only looked at each other a few times and talked to each other. Today's waist hug was the most intimate action between the two of them during this period of time. It could be said that he had restrained himself to the extreme. However, Shengguan Jing still felt that he was very, very redundant. What a miscalculation! Rong Xiu and Chu Luiyue looked over at the same time. At the same time, Rong Xiu's fingertips gently rubbed her back twice, then he tactfully retracted his hand. Chu Luiyue, she gave Rong Xiu a warning look. Control yourself. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. Am I not restrained enough? Chu Luiyue, Shengguan Jing looked up at the sky. Cough, I think it's about time. Can we prepare to enter the Scarlet Soul Forest? The weather was clear and there were no clouds in the sky. The Scarlet Soul Forest, which looked especially eerie in the darkness last night, looked much more normal now. Black trees stood tall. Occasionally, thick roots would be revealed, and they were also completely black. The red leaves swayed in the wind, like a scene at the end of autumn that was about to wither. However, the strange thing was that there were no leaves on the ground in the forest. Not a single one. In a normal forest, there would be a thick layer of fallen leaves, but here it was flat and clean. Looking at it like this, it was inevitable that one would find it strange. Let's go. After Shengguan Jing finished speaking, he took the lead and entered. Chu Luiyue glanced at the swaying red leaves. He narrowed his eyes and walked in. Shengguan Jing took the lead, followed by Chu Luiyue. Rong Xiu was one step behind her and was at the end of the line. The soil on the ground was reddish-brown and very soft. Stepping on it would not make any sound. The forest was very quiet. Other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, there was no other sound. They could even hear each other's breathing. In the Scarlet Soul Forest, one cannot use origin power, nor can one fly. One can only walk forward step by step. As Shengguan Jing walked, he patiently explained some things to pay attention to. Although it's a lot slower, it's safer. To walk through the Scarlet Soul Forest, it would take about 4 hours. We should be able to leave this place before the poison gas spreads again. Chu Luiyue listened from the back and responded obediently. Then, he couldn't help but ask, Taizu, you've been to the god-slaying tomb before. What? Have I never heard you mention it? The point was that he seemed to know this place better than others. What had he experienced here in the past? Taizu pondered for a while before he spoke again. In fact, there's nothing I can't say. It's just that the last time I came here, I didn't have a good memory, so I didn't mention it to you. No one was willing to take the initiative to recall and mention those unhappy memories. This time, if Chu Luiyue had not been forced here by the other party, he would not have mentioned it. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. She had never seen Taizu like this. It should be. What happened here really made it hard for him to let go. Taizu, if you don't want to say it actually, Shengguan Jing waved his hand and suddenly laughed. It's nothing. It's been so many years. He paused for a while before he continued. That year, before I went to the northern region of Untainted Land, the last place I stayed was the god-slaying tomb. Chu Luiyue was a bit shocked. Didn't this mean that Taizu went to the northern region of Untainted Land from here? But these two places were famous for being dangerous in the world of divine ruins. Why did he? When I came to the world of divine ruins, I didn't belong to any sect, but I was arrogant. After I defeated 7 weapon refining supremacies, I became even more famous and attracted many people to follow me, but also caused a lot of hatred. Since I had already established the heavenly order, I naturally didn't want to establish a sect here. I wanted to be alone, so I rejected all the followers. But I met a friend and we had a good chat. He wasn't a weapon refining master, just an ordinary martial artist with average talent. He stayed at the high god level for many years and still couldn't break through. But he was open-minded and I admired him. I heard that he was also a person outside the world of divine ruins and came here alone, so I appreciated him and treated him as a close friend. Later, he heard that there was a supreme treasure in the God-slaying tomb that could help him break through to the God level, so he was a bit eager to try. I heard that this place was dangerous, so I decided to come with him. If I could help him break through to the God level, I would be able to get rid of a knot in his heart. Hearing this, Chu Luiwei had already guessed something. Sure enough, Taizu heaved a long sigh. Unfortunately, I treated him like a close friend, but he was just using me. After we came here, we went through a lot of difficulties and finally found that thing. But whoosh. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. In the Crimson Soul Forest, a mournful whimper sounded from afar. Digression. See you tomorrow, mobile users. Please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1636. Chu Luiwei's heart tightened. He looked up at the forest, but found that the sound seemed to be coming from all directions, and he couldn't tell where it was coming from. Shengguan Jing frowned and said, "Don't worry. Those are just vengeful spirits in the Scarlet Soul Forest." Vengeful spirits? That's right. The so-called vengeful spirits are the souls of those cultivators who wanted to pass through the Scarlet Soul Forest and enter the God-slaying tomb. Because they were trapped here, they are full of resentment and resentment. However, these souls don't have their own will and consciousness. As long as we don't use force, we won't be discovered by them and can pass through safely. Chu Luiwei nodded thoughtfully. I see. The whimpering sound was mournful and miserable, as if it was right beside them. When the sound clearly fell into their ears, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. It wasn't hard to imagine how miserable and pitiful these people were when they died in the Scarlet Soul Forest. Fortunately, the three of them were mentally strong and weren't disturbed by the whimpering sound. They continued forward. However, after being disturbed by the sound, Shengguan Jing didn't continue speaking. Chu Luiwei didn't ask any more questions. Taizu had always been free and easy. Chu Luiwei could see that the incident back then had a deep impact on him. So much so that today, 1,000 years later, he still didn't want to mention it. He probably hadn't completely let it go. In fact, it was understandable if he thought about it carefully. At that time, Taizu was alone in the Divine Ruins world and only regarded this person as a friend. It was almost a trust that he could entrust his life to. However, the other party betrayed him for a treasure. No matter who it was, they wouldn't feel good about such a thing. However, Chu Luiwei still had a small question in his heart. At that time, Taizu was already a venerable artificer. This status was much higher than that of the venerable god and the doctor of the same level. Then, why did that person choose to betray Taizu and kill Taizu just for a treasure that could help a cultivator break through from the high god to the venerable god? On one hand, Taizu had no interest in this thing. On the other hand, even if he obtained the treasure and successfully became a god, he would still be slightly inferior to Taizu. Why did he have to be so decisive? However, since Taizu did not continue, Chu Luiwei did not ask further. For Taizu, every time he mentioned it, it was a process of tearing open the scars of his wounds. She pursed her lips and lowered her eyes. Suppressing the doubts and emotions in her heart, she continued to move forward with Taizu. There were a few times when Chu Luiwei's ears hurt from the sobbing. She even felt that someone was standing beside her, ready to kill her at any time. But in the end, she controlled herself and ignored it, burying her head in the front. After walking for an unknown period of time, the mournful and shrill sobbing sound finally subsided. Chu Luiwei heaved a sigh of relief. The sound was endless and did not dissipate for a long time. No one knew how many people had died here, and no one knew how many skeletons were buried under this seemingly flat and clean ground. A gust of wind blew, and the leaves rustled. Chu Luiwei looked up. On the black trees, countless red leaves swayed in the wind. As she got closer, she could clearly see the veins on one of the leaves. They were not the veins of a normal leaf, but the shape of a human bone. A gust of cold air surged up from the soles of her feet. Chu Liyue calmly withdrew her gaze, but the scene of the leaves swaying in the wind like bloody palms last night appeared in her mind. So, the Red Soul Forest was not even within the range of the god-slaying mound, but it was already so terrifying and dangerous. What kind of danger awaited them when they entered the god-slaying mound? We're almost out of here. At this moment, Taizu's words interrupted Chu Liyue's thoughts. She looked up in the direction of the voice and found that the edge of the forest was faintly visible. In about half an hour, they should be able to get out. Chu Liyue did not dare to let down her guard. She followed Taizu even more cautiously. As long as they could, a sharp scream suddenly broke the silence in the forest. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. This was not the voice of a vengeful spirit, but of a human. And it sounded familiar. Chu Liyue and the rest turned their heads and looked in the direction of the voice. Then they saw a few familiar figures. It was Nan Yuxing and the rest. They seemed to have encountered some danger and were running towards them quickly. As they ran, they would turn their heads from time to time, as if they were afraid that something would catch up with them. Taizu could not help but curse. At this time, they were about to successfully leave this place, but trouble came looking for them again. "Let's go!" Taizu immediately shouted. He grabbed Chu Liyue's wrist and quickly headed out of the forest. Rong Xiu also quickly caught up and followed behind the two of them. "Wait, you guys." Nan Yuxing and the rest were originally in a terrible state. When they suddenly saw the figures in front of them, they did not care about anything else and immediately shouted, "Help us. We will definitely thank you." As the distance between the two parties was not too close and there were trees in the forest, they did not see clearly that Chu Liyue and the rest were in front of them. Chu Liyue frowned. Hearing Nan Yuxing's anxious voice and the scream from Nanny just now, it was not difficult to deduce that they were definitely in trouble now. However, because Taizu's reaction was extremely fast, she did not see the specific situation over there clearly. However, it was precisely because Taizu's reaction was fast and strong that she was even more certain that this was definitely not a good thing. Thinking about how arrogant those people were before they came in. Now that even they were forced to this point, it was obvious that they were in trouble. They were about to get out safely. If they were dragged down by others at this time, Chu Liyue was not sure if she would have the intention to kill them. However, because they could not use force in the forest, their speed did not increase by much. On the other hand, Nan Yuxing and the rest were already forced into a life-and-death situation. How could they care so much? They only knew how to use their full speed to attack. The distance between the two parties was rapidly shrinking. Chu Liyue could even hear the strange rustling sound behind her. She could not help but look back. The moment she saw it, her pupils immediately shrank. In the forest, Nan Yuxing and the rest were fleeing in a sorry state. Nanny looked panicked and her face was full of tears. There was also an additional wound on her left shoulder. Although it had been reluctantly bandaged with gauze, a dark red color still seeped out. The two elders were protecting them from behind, but they did not seem to be in good condition either. And behind them, several scarlet leaves were rapidly approaching. Wherever those leaves passed, they actually tore open black spatial cracks. It was as if they would swallow them up at any time. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1637. Things had developed to this stage, and it was beyond Nan Yuxing and the rest's expectations. At that time, Nan Yi was so agitated by Rong Xiu's words that she couldn't take it anymore and ran away crying. After Nan Yuxing chased after her, he saw that Nan Yi had unknowingly run to the edge of the Scarlet Soul Forest. He was worried and wanted to bring her back immediately. Although the Scarlet Soul Forest wasn't difficult for them, it would definitely be dangerous for Nan Yi to go in alone in her current state. Nan Yuxing wanted to persuade her to come back before they went in with the two elders. However, Nan Yi was so agitated that she plunged into the Scarlet Soul Forest without thinking. In fact, Nan Yuxing caught up very quickly. However, the crux of the matter was that when Nan Yi barged into the Scarlet Soul Forest, the force in her body was surging violently. This time, they were in trouble. When Elder Bai Tong and Elder Wu Peng caught up, something was wrong with the surroundings. Not long after, those leaves fell and started to attack Nanti. The injury on her shoulder was caused at that time. After that, they had no choice but to deal with the danger while desperately running outside. Fortunately, these two elders, including Nan Yuxing, weren't weak, so they were barely able to hold on until now. It wasn't easy for them to see someone, so they wanted to ask for help. They didn't expect the other party to run away after hearing their call for help. Nan Yuxing's resentment finally reached its peak when he saw the faces of those people. "Why are you guys here?" His expression changed drastically, and even his footsteps slowed down. Chu Luiyue found it funny. They were the ones who ran over and even brought the danger over, yet they still had the cheek to ask such a question? Ignore them. Taizu turned back and saw those red leaves crazily strangling them. He frowned and turned to leave at an even faster speed. Seeing them leave without a word, Nan Yuxing was even more resentful. If they hadn't bullied Yi, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Originally, everything was well prepared, but now, there was endless trouble. It wasn't that they didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the Scarlet Soul Forest. Nan Yuxing gritted his teeth. Since things had already come to this, he might as well drag them down with him. If they couldn't leave this place, then the other party had to stay as well. Thinking of this, Nan Yuxing suddenly increased his speed. This time, the origin power aura on his body became even denser. Even the leaves on the surrounding trees began to fall and rush towards him. Rong Xiu glanced back when he noticed the commotion behind him. A cold, killing intent flashed through his eyes. His hand moved slightly, but Taizu suddenly shouted at him to stop. "Rong Xiu, don't use your force." They were about to leave, and if they attacked now, all their efforts would be for naught. Rong Xiu's eyes narrowed dangerously. In the end, he suppressed his urge and did not make a move. At this moment, Nan Yuxing had already arrived in front of them. His body had been scratched by the leaves and was bleeding profusely. But he didn't care. With a flash of cold light, a long sword suddenly appeared in his hand, and he went straight for Rong Xiu. But just as the sword was about to pierce Rong Xiu, Nan Yuxing suddenly tilted his wrist, changed the direction, and attacked Chu Luiyue. He was here for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, Rong Xiu's eyes seemed to be surging with turbulent waves. However, just as he was about to make a move, a reddish-gold light suddenly flashed in front of Chu Luiyue. Nan Yuxing only saw a blur in front of him, and a girl who looked no more than 3 or 4 years old suddenly appeared in front of him. The girl was petite and wore a reddish-gold lotus leaf dress. Her 2 white little feet were bare, and her hair was tied up in 2 buns with a red string and a golden bell. She was very beautiful and cute. Her large, grape-like eyes made her look even more innocent. Nan Yuxing frowned subconsciously. Why did such a little girl suddenly appear? Could it be the child of these two? But if that was the case, how did they hide this child before? "You're so annoying." Before he could figure it out, he heard the little girl in front of him suddenly speak. She fiddled with the bell on her head. Her expression was innocent, but there was also a hint of laziness and indifference. Nan Yuxing was stunned at first, but then a fierce look flashed across his face. Who cares who she is? Since she's with those people, I'll just kill her. He did not stop moving, and the sharp blade pierced straight ahead. When the sword fell, it would definitely pierce through the little girl's heart. Dumpling finally stopped fiddling with the bell and looked forward. The tip of the sword was already a fist's distance away from her forehead. Her hair was blown up by the cold wind, and the corner of her dress swayed. Nan Yuxing's lips curled into a cold smile. However, in the next moment, the expression on his face suddenly froze. Because his sword had suddenly stopped. The other end of the sharp blade was grabbed by a chubby little hand. Nan Yuxing did not react for a moment. This little girl had actually blocked his attack with her bare hands? How was this possible? Although he had not used his full strength, he had definitely used 70 to 80% of it. Such a child, how could crack? A crisp breaking sound was heard. Nan Yuxing watched as his sword was forcibly broken by the other party's little hand. In the next moment, before he could react, the little figure in front of him suddenly approached rapidly. So fast. Nan Yuxing was shocked. He did not sense any fluctuation of force from the other party at all. How could she have such a fast movement technique? However, he no longer had time to think about this. Bang! A dull sound was heard. An intense pain quickly spread from his lower abdomen. Dumpling had directly approached and punched Nan Yuxing's body. Nan Yuxing's hand unconsciously loosened, and the sword fell to the ground with a clang. At the same time, his body flew backwards and landed heavily on the ground. Big brother! Eldest young master! Nan Yi and the rest were shocked when they saw this scene. Due to the pain, Nan Yuxing's body was bent into the shape of a shrimp. He felt that several of his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were squeezed into a ball. He was in so much pain that he did not know if they had ruptured. His face was pale, and he was covered in cold sweat. He almost fainted. In a daze, there was only one thought left in his mind. That little girl, who exactly is she? She actually has such a strong combat ability? Whoosh, a rustling sound could be heard. Nan Yuxing opened his eyes with difficulty, and to his horror, he saw countless red leaves coming towards him. Ah! A shrill scream resounded in the forest. Tuanzi spread out her hands and shrugged helplessly. I already said that you are very annoying. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1638. Dumpling was a crimson gold heavenly phoenix, and she had already opened her fourth meridian. Although she looked like a white and tender ball of flesh, in reality, her physical strength was extremely strong. She wouldn't care even if 100 swords attacked her at the same time, let alone a single sword. She didn't need to use force. A gentle punch was enough to kill the other party. Nan Yuxing was already injured, and he looked down on Dumpling. If he wasn't dealt with, who would be dealt with? Nan Yi and the rest panicked when they saw Nan Yuxing's figure being swallowed by the red leaves. They couldn't care less about the danger and rushed over. They didn't even have the time and energy to get angry. All they could think of was to save Nan Yuxing as soon as possible. If they were too late then, Dumpling, let's go. Chu Luiwei waved at Dumpling. I'm coming. Dumpling replied happily. She immediately turned around and ran toward Chu Luiwei. Tuanzi originally wanted to throw herself into her arms, but when she caught a glimpse of the corner of her white clothes, she restrained herself. Well done. A cold voice came from above. Dumpling widened her eyes in shock and looked at Rong Xiu in disbelief. His expression was calm, but there was a rare look of admiration in his eyes. This, was he praising her? Dumpling blinked, but Rong Xiu had already looked away. Her eyes darted around as she tried to pull Chu Luiwei's sleeves with her small hands. Chu Luiwei grabbed her hand. Tuanzi hurriedly glanced at Rong Xiu and saw him raise his brows, but he did not say anything. Did he agree? Dumpling was overjoyed. She could finally be together with Yu openly. She hurriedly grabbed Chu Luiwei's hand tightly and followed her step by step, not forgetting to ask, Yu, did I perform well just now? Chu Luiwei couldn't help but laugh. After so many years, Dumpling had broken through from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to her current appearance. Her strength and bloodline had increased tremendously, but her personality was still the same as before. Every time he did something, he would always rush over excitedly to claim credit. Chu Luiwei pinched her nose. Well done. A big smile bloomed on Dumpling's face. If he had known that the reward this time would be so good, he would have thrown a few more punches just now. If Nan Yuxing knew what Dumpling was thinking, he would probably vomit blood. Just to hold hands with his master and talk to him, he beat him to death? The most important thing was that he could really fight. In this Crimson Soul Forest, all the cultivators didn't dare to use their origin power arbitrarily. Once they did, it was a risk of life and death. However, there was one person who was able to defeat all of them just by relying on his physical strength alone. Was there any justice in this world? Of course, Chu Luiwei and the rest weren't interested in knowing what happened to Nan Yuxing and the rest. After walking for a short distance, the sky finally brightened up. Shengguanjing finally said, "We're out." Hearing Taizu's voice, Chu Luwei took a step forward. At this moment, she clearly felt that everything around her seemed to have changed subtly. Without the cover of the forest, the sunlight poured down without restraint. Chu Luwei squinted slightly. After getting used to the light, she looked ahead. In the wilderness, as far as the eye could see, countless broken tombstones were scattered everywhere. They had entered the Crimson Soul Forest since noon and took about 4 hours to come out. It was still afternoon, when the sun was still shining. However, at a glance, the scene in front of them sent chills down their spines. "So this is the Godslayer tomb," Chu Luwei muttered softly. The Godslayer tomb was indeed a graveyard. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in the sky. The warm and bright sunlight was blocked outside. No matter how good the weather was, it was still cold and bleak here. A gloomy aura was looming. This is only the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Those who died here were all exalted gods. Shengguanjing explained. Chu Luwei held her breath slightly. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of tombstones here. And these were all exalted gods. More importantly, with their strength, they could only be at the edge of the Godslayer tomb. Then what was deeper inside? After passing through here and entering the center of the Godslayer tomb, you will find the tombs of exalted gods. Shengguanjing's voice was very calm. But in Chu Luwei's ears, every word was like thunder. The tombs of exalted gods? How many had died to be called a tomb? She only knew that the Godslayer tomb was a dangerous place where many exalted gods were buried, but she didn't know the truth was so horrifying. One had to know that in the entire Lingshao Academy, the number of supreme gods that were still alive did not exceed the number of fingers on one hand. But there were so many buried here. Tens of thousands of years ago, a bloody battle broke out here. It was said that the battle lasted for 81 days. Countless top exalted gods died in the battle and were buried here in the end. That's how the Godslayer tomb came to be. Shengguanjing seemed to have seen Chu Luwei's confusion and explained patiently. It was said that at that time, the Divine Ruins world was full of force. Exalted gods were not numerous, but there were many of them. That's why so many peerless exalted gods were implicated in that bloody battle, and they all died here together. That's why the battle was so fierce. Almost all the exalted gods and souls were destroyed. Even their treasures and cultivation arts were all destroyed. That's why the Godslayer tomb has become a notorious place of evil over the years. Shengguanjing sighed as if he found it a pity. Because of that battle, countless inheritances were broken. Chu Luwei frowned and couldn't help but ask, then why did such a fierce battle break out at that time? It sounded like it wasn't a conflict between a few forces, but many people were involved. Shengguanjing pondered for a moment. It's been tens of thousands of years. How do the descendants know? It's just that, when I came here that year, I accidentally found some clues. They seemed to be fighting over a book. Chu Luwei was stunned. The book? What kind of book? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 1639. I don't know about that. Shengguanjing shook his head. The battle back then was full of mysteries to the later generations. It was already extremely rare to be able to inadvertently find a clue. As for the rest, it was even more difficult for him to find out more. Chu Luwei thought about it and agreed. Everyone in the world didn't know about it, let alone Taizu, an outsider. Moreover, he came here back then to accompany that friend of his to find something. It was an accident that he knew about this. Since most of those people's treasures were destroyed, then what was left should be extraordinary, right? Chu Luwei finally couldn't help but ask. Taizu, is the thing you were looking for really just to help a high god expert break through to the venerable god realm? Taizu was stunned, then frowned. He had never thought about this. Every time he thought of the god-slaying mound, he would recall the pain of being betrayed. That was why he had tried his best not to think about it all these years. There were many things that had happened during that time that he had not thought about in detail. However, after hearing Chu Liyue's words, he realized that something was indeed wrong. In the Divine Ruins world, there were countless cultivators who were trapped in the High God realm for their entire lives and could not advance further. Because at this stage of cultivation, it was already time to rely on talent. No matter how diligent one was, without talent and comprehension, one would not be able to successfully break through. Therefore, when he heard that there was such a treasure back then, he did not hesitate to follow that person. At that time, he only thought that that person wanted it, and he had never doubted it. But now that he thought about it, there was indeed something wrong everywhere. He didn't need that thing, and he wouldn't fight with that person. Why did that person want to kill him? One had to know that if he died, that person would lose a top-notch weapon refining venerable. This could only prove that the value of that thing, in that person's eyes, was higher than that of a weapon refining venerable. And such an item was rare in the world. Shang Guanjing suddenly felt that his memories of the past seemed to be covered by a layer of gauze, and they became unclear. The truth that he believed back then, perhaps, there was something else going on? Shang Guanjing's heart beat violently. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed his emotions. Perhaps, he paused for a moment, but didn't continue. Instead, he changed the topic. Forget it, let's talk about this later. He looked at Chu Liyue. That person told you to come to the god-slaying mound, but did he specify the meeting place? Chu Liyue looked into the distance. He didn't say it explicitly. I should be able to reach it with the guidance of the sea buckthorn wooden token. The other party had put in so much effort to lure her here, so there was no way he would refuse to see her. Tomorrow is the day we meet. Chu Liyue pondered for a moment. Perhaps he will only appear tomorrow. Shang Guanjing thought about it and felt that it made sense. Then should we wait here or, let's go inside and take a look? Chu Liyue stared straight ahead, slowly clenching his fists in his sleeves. She had a premonition. The other party definitely had a motive for inviting her here. What is it? They officially entered the god-slaying mound. Broken tombstones were scattered everywhere, and there were no bones to be seen. Tens of thousands of years of wind, frost, and snow had already sharpened everything. Chu Liyue walked through, glancing at the tombstones. She could see that there used to be words carved on them, but now, those words had been eroded by time and became blurred. Most of them only had faint traces left. After walking for a while, Chu Liyue felt that the heat on her body had been swallowed up silently. The surrounding cold air silently engulfed her. Without these tombstones, no one would know that under this vast and desolate land, there were countless skeletons of strong masters of the supreme gods. Their moods seemed to have been affected by the atmosphere. They walked forward quietly. Even Dumpling, who had always been cheerful and noisy, noticed something at this time. She grabbed Chu Liyue's hand, pursed her lips, and followed without saying a word. After walking for a while, Chu Liyue frowned more and more. She pondered for a long time and finally spoke. Taizu, do you know who set up these tombstones? If it was a descendant, why were these tombstones broken? Taizu paused and his voice was much lower. They should have been set up by the strong masters who participated in the war back then. Chu Liyue's heart skipped a beat. They had set up tombstones without even fighting. This was the determination to die. No wonder the war back then was so tragic. So many strong masters of the supreme gods had been killed in their souls. What kind of book could cause them to act like this? Chu Liyue could not figure it out. Perhaps only those people back then knew the answer. Something bumped against her foot. Chu Liyue looked down and saw a fist-sized rock that seemed to have rolled over from the side. Chu Liyue was deep in thought just now, so she didn't notice it. However, this rock was very ordinary, and it didn't hurt when it hit her foot. Moreover, it stopped there. Chu Liyue didn't take it to heart. She continued walking forward. Not long after, another rock rolled over. This time, Chu Liyue saw it in advance. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Because this rock was also coming for her. She didn't move. She only took a step to the side when the rock was about to rush over. The rock rolled past her previous position, but it quickly stopped. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. She could clearly see that this rock wasn't obstructed at all. It stopped on its own. What's wrong? Shengguan Jing sensed that something was wrong with her and turned to ask. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything and looked around. Although there were many broken tombstones scattered here, it was flat and spacious. Why was there a rock rolling towards her out of nowhere? And there was more than one. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Luiyue heard a soft sound behind her. She turned to look. As expected, another rock was heading straight for her. Digression. When I woke up in the morning, I realized that my lousy laptop had automatically deleted my writing software. Fortunately, I installed it in my new laptop before. After tossing and turning for a while, it was 12:30 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read, a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1640. Then a second piece and a third piece. The surrounding stones seemed to be guided by some kind of power. They all became restless and moved toward Chu Luiyue. This is... Shengguan Jing was also stunned. He had never encountered such a situation when he came here before. More importantly, this movement was obviously coming for Chu Luiyue. What was going on? Rong Xiu frowned slightly and held Chu Luiyue's hand. We have to leave as soon as possible. These stones are all from the broken tombstones of the supreme gods. Being chased by broken tombstones was already uncomfortable enough. Moreover, these were all supreme gods' tombstones? Not to mention that these stones might contain a certain amount of power. No one could be sure about that. Therefore, Rong Xiu made a prompt decision to leave with Chu Luiyue immediately. Chu Luiyue's eyes met with his, and she lightly nodded. Chu Luiyue and the others began to speed up and move toward the center of the god-slaying mound. Behind them, more and more stones rolled toward them. It would be fine if there were only a few. However, as time passed, the stones had almost gathered into a river and were rushing toward Chu Luiyue. This scene was too strange. However, what made Chu Luiyue feel strange was that she did not sense any killing intent from these stones. They seemed to be controlled by something and kept gathering toward her. However, specifically, it seemed that they did not intend to do anything. Of course, Chu Luiyue did not dare to let her guard down. She could only rely on her feelings to determine whether there was danger. After all, this was the god-slaying mound. Fortunately, Taizu had been here before and was experienced, so he could quickly find a safe way forward. Along the way, they were scared but not in danger. However, after walking for a long time, the surrounding scenery did not change at all. Taizu had said before that as long as they entered the tombstones of the supreme gods, these strange stones would definitely stop. But after such a long time, it still seemed so far away. Chu Luiyue could not help but ask, Taizu, when can we get out of here? Shengguan Jing glanced at the sky and said uncertainly, that's right. About 4 to 6 hours left. In fact, he was still understating it. Back then, he had walked here for 3 days and 3 nights. Even though it was his first time here and he didn't know where to go, it was enough to prove that this place was vast and he couldn't leave so quickly. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. She knew Taizu too well. This meant that they might stay here for a longer period of time. Now that they were moving at full speed, those behind them still couldn't catch up. There was always a certain distance between them. However, their strength was constantly being depleted, while the rocks were constantly converging. As their numbers increased, Chu Luiyue noticed that their aura and energy were much stronger than before. No one could guarantee that they would be able to walk out safely. Chu Luiyue felt a headache coming on. Could it be that there's something special on me that's causing this commotion? But it doesn't seem like anything. Wasn't everything fine in the past? Why is it so strange here? The key was that all cultivators could not fly here. This made their situation even more difficult. At this moment, a rock suddenly rolled to the bottom of Chu Luiyue's feet. Her heart skipped a beat. Her body fell to the side uncontrollably. Wuxia. Rong Xiu was standing beside her. When he saw this, he immediately hugged her slender waist and pulled her into his arms. Chu Luiyue felt that she had fallen into a broad and firm chest. A cold fragrance instantly enveloped her. Just as she helped Rong Xiu stand up, she heard Taizu's exclamation behind her. Chu Luiyue knew that something was wrong. She immediately turned around and saw that Taizu seemed to have slipped on the rocks and was falling backward. Most importantly, when the great ancestor fell halfway, the void behind him suddenly rippled with a few waves. Half of Taizu's body was then swallowed by the void. Taizu. Before Chu Luiyue could finish her sentence, Taizu's figure had completely disappeared. Just like that, he disappeared before their eyes without making a sound. Chu Luiyue's eyes widened. She was about to go forward when Rong Xiu hugged her tightly. That's the void turbulence. Then, Chu Luiyue saw that the moment they rolled to the edge of the fluctuating void, they turned into dust. Her heart suddenly trembled. Senior Shangguan is a venerable god expert. He can definitely protect himself. Rong Xiu said in a low voice. She was still a venerable god, so she naturally could not go over. Chu Luiyue gritted her teeth. Rong Xiu was right. Taizu was powerful and had been here before. Nothing should happen to him. What she needed to do now was to protect herself. Gradually, the ripples calmed down. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Chu Luiyue had just opened her mouth when she suddenly felt a strong suction force beside her. She quickly turned her head and saw that the rocks had unknowingly formed some strange pattern on the ground. And that powerful force was erupting from the center of it. It was as if it was going to swallow her. The wind howled. Chu Luiyue's hair danced wildly. Rong Xiu hugged her tightly and pressed her head against his chest. Hold me tight. Chu Luiyue instinctively hugged his lean waist even more tightly. Rong Xiu looked up. Two extremely intense colors, one gold and one black, suddenly appeared in his eyes. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.